This is my first time doing this, so you're just gonna have to stick with me, okay? It's gonna be a little bit rough around the edges. Okay, so I've been online in the game and media review space for a while, and whenever you're talking about these like long-standing franchises, especially one that's past its peak in popularity, one term that you're going to hear all the time is that of nostalgia bait. By definition, nostalgia bait is just a piece of media that only has value in making people look at it and say, I remember that! As this cynical Urban Dictionary definition puts it, nostalgia bait is used to sucker in their fans and make them believe something is good just because the familiar is there. It's pretty much used as an indictment of a company as creatively bankrupt, only being able to keep a fan base by referencing when the property was good, and not being able to provide that anymore with their new content. Nope, I've seen this criticism used more against movies than anything else, which for good reason, but it definitely shows up in discussions about video games from time to time. This makes sense, right? Most AAA games are from long-standing franchises. There are basically no new IPs outside of the indie space, and it feels like video games are just stuck in the same loop of sequels and self-reference that movies are. But that's not really the case, is it? I mean, yes, a lot of recent releases have been sequels or remakes or whatever, but there are plenty of new IPs over the past couple years. Look at like Astrobot or Elden Ring, Ghost of Tsushima, Hi-Fi Rush, the list goes on. Really, while there are plenty of remakes and sequels being released, there's also a ton of, new content that's out there. But actually, with that in mind, I don't think nostalgia bait in games is necessarily that bad. Like, don't get me wrong, I can think of plenty of examples where it is completely fair. Looking at you, Green Hill Zone or Gen 1 remakes. But I think it's a lot easier for video games to pull this off well than movies or, any other media. And, I'm mainly a Nintendo kind of person, Nintendo indie area, and I've seen in my experience that Nintendo is generally pretty good about this. Recent examples like Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey weave in references to their old games phenomenally and, subtly as well, but they've been doing this for a while. Even some now older games, like, back in the Mario Galaxy 2, which had Throwback Star, right? Like, this isn't a new concept to Nintendo. Though, while these franchises do that well in their own right, I think there's one Nintendo franchise in particular that stands out above the rest in using nostalgia to enhance their series instead of detracting from it. And it starts with one little pink puffball.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
World leaders paid tribute today to Japan's Emperor Hirohito, dead of cancer at 87 years at that Paris conference on chemical weapons. We saw
and its games are interchangeable. Plus, Game Boy comes with the outrageous new game, Tetris. And for head-to-head...
The year is 1989, and a small game studio by the name of HAL Laboratories is looking for a hit. They had seen some small success with the Eggerland series, but were mostly known as the second party to developer to Nintendo, without too much under their belt. In their search, they hired a 19-year-old developer by the name of Masahiro Sakurai, and though they didn't realize it at the time, it was the most important decision the studio would ever make. Sakurai was a true student of game design. From an early age, he was always playing video games, and in high school took on a part-time job and spent all of his spare time and money on games. Not only did he play an enormous amount of video games, he would even intentionally seek out games that he didn't find fun or interesting, because he thought that he could learn the most about game design by learning from other people's mistakes. When HAL hired Sakurai fresh out of high school, they were looking for a game that anyone could enjoy, and Sakurai had a proposal in mind. The main idea behind his game was using enemies to attack. He originally thought about the character using tongue grabs like Yoshi, though this was before Mario World came out, but he settled on a system of inhaling and spitting enemies out. He wanted to make the game accessible to new players, as home games at the time were notoriously difficult and unforgiving, so he made the player able to fly over the level, avoiding enemies and pits if they wanted to. And finally, he wanted to make a cute main character who everyone will love. And so he drew a circle, then he dotted the eyes, added a great big smile, and presto, he made the character we now know as Kirby. All of these elements were combined with a simple plot of an evil penguin king hoarding all the food in his kingdom, creating Kirby's Dream Land. The game released on the Game Boy in 1992. It quickly sold nearly 5 million copies worldwide. It was praised for its beginner-friendly mechanics and new style of gameplay, and it was clear that HAL had found their hit. Over the next 20 years, the series would become a mainstay in the Nintendo sphere, expanding on the Inhale with copy abilities, picking up characters like Meta Knight and the Waddle Dees, all while keeping the original goal of being beginner-friendly and broadly appealing. The franchise gained a reputation of being essentially baby's first Nintendo game, which is, again, by Nintendo standards, and took on a very power of friendship kind of angle to its stories and theming. The games would introduce new characters, and each game felt like a new story, but they all kept the same core cast, and would consistently reference old games and characters by using old music tracks, revamping old bosses, or even reusing old level designs. I mean, nearly every Kirby game since the original has had some variation of King Dedede, Meta Knight, and Wispy Woods as bosses, though usually serving completely different roles in each story. And in every game, no matter how dire the situation or how eldritch the deity is fighting, Kirby and his friends would come out on top, and Planet Popstar would go back to normal at the end of the story. Planet Robobot is the 11th game in the mainline series, and it follows Kirby as he fights his greatest foe yet, late-stage capitalism. The intergalactic megacorporation Haltman Works has landed a giant spaceship on planet Popstar and started mechanizing it and harvesting it for natural resources, all at the expense of its inhabitants and environment, kind of Eggman style. Of course, the antitrust king Kirby can't have this, so he ventures into the mechanized world, taking out the legs of the spaceship and freeing its inhabitants from their forced corporate 9-to-5s. On his journey, he encounters old friends and foes, now with a technological twist. Wispy Woods becomes Clanky Woods, now equipped with mechanical limbs and a rocket launcher. King Dedede is replaced by a clone that splits into multiple mini Dededes that eventually hop in a moving cannon to blow you up. Meta Knight has been forcibly given a sick-as-hell scorpion tail, and even forgotten bosses like Kabula, Ice Dragon, Coily Rattler, and the Sphere Doomers make an appearance. The first new face Kirby comes across is Susie, the executive assistant to the president of Haltman Works and the leader of the Invasion Project. She's directly responsible for the mechanization of Kirby's friends, but it's clear that she's following the president's orders and even hints at some instructions from a so-called mother computer. After defeating the bosses and destroying the legs in each of the 5 main areas, Kirby enters the center sphere of the ship, the Access Arc, blasting through offices until he reaches the top. There, he finally meets the president, whose name is, I'm not joking, Max Prophet Haltman, who is so insane that his laughing and sound effects had to be included in the Spotify version of his battle theme. By the way, yeah, this game soundtrack is entirely on Spotify. I don't know why, and I think it's the only Nintendo soundtrack that's on Spotify. I'm really not sure why, but I'm not complaining, right? I just wish more were on there. After firing Susie right in front of Kirby, Haltman reveals that using the ancient technology he had collected, he had been able to reactivate the most powerful supercomputer in existence, Stardream, the mother computer that Susie was referring to earlier. After a fierce battle with Kirby, Haltman attempts to link into Stardream with a headset, only for Susie to swoop in and snatch it off his head mid-link. She reveals that the whole time she was actually a corporate spy waiting to steal Stardream out from under Haltman when he wasn't expecting it. But when she tries to put on the helmet, the computer fires a laser at her, knocking her unconscious. It turns out that removing the headset mid-link actually caused Stardream to be able to take control of Haltman, allowing it to essentially become sentient and control what it's doing. And of course, taking the Ultron route, it calculated that all life forms are a detriment to the company's growth and profits, and so they all needed to be eliminated. After Kirby merges with the entire halberd in one of the coolest transformation sequences in this franchise, and then shoots down Stardream, the computer links into the Access Arc itself and starts attacking Kirby with essentially an entire planet.
As Kirby shoots it, pieces of the shell break off, and it's revealed that the access arc was actually built around a giant Nova Comet, a clockwork star last seen in Kirby Superstar that has the ability to grant wishes. After a very trippy battle sequence, Kirby eventually defeats the computer, drilling a hole straight through it, and Planet Popstar is reverted back to its natural state. So, with the basic plot out of the way, how does this connect to Nostalgia Bait? Well, the entire game is themed around it. For one, Robobot is probably the second most referential game in the entire series. Nearly all the enemies and bosses in Robobot are just old characters with, new mechanized bits added to them, even including the final boss with the Nova Comet. Robobot has fewer completely unique bosses than a game literally called Return to Dreamland, and it's not even close. The music is filled with remixes and just straight up reused tracks from old games, which is nothing new for the franchise, but it's definitely done to a higher degree in this game. Basically, the entire game would make a Kirby fan point and say, hey, I know that thing. So why am I saying that Robobot is different than, say, modern Star Wars? Well, for two reasons. Mainly because the Nostalgia Bait serves the plot, and the game's actually good. So on top of the usual purpose of Nostalgia Bait as being something to just appeal to older fans, on a metatextual level, the events of Robobot actually represent how Nostalgia Bait is used by real-world companies negatively. The Holtman Corporation goes around planet to planet stealing ideas, technology, and even people, just to kind of lazily slap on some metal and be like, okay, you're ours now, and use it for their own goals. Looking at the bosses in Robobot, you have Clanky Woods, which is wispy woods with metal on it. You have the Hollow Defense, which is just 4 old mini bosses and even just regular world bosses from older Kirby games. And then you have Susie, who's an original character. Then you have the DDD clones, which obviously are based off DDD. Then you have Mecha Knight somewhere in there, who is based off of Meta Knight. And then again, even when you get to the final boss, it's all wrapped around a Nova Comet, and the final phase of the boss fight references the various trinkets that kind of are around the Nova Comet from Superstar. It's all very referential, and it's emblematic of them going around and taking these things and essentially trying to do the same thing to Popstar. Now, this is the exact things that mega corporations Disney, for instance, are doing. They go around, they take properties, buy them up, and either get rid of them to eliminate competition, or they will just repurpose them and kind of put out slop that's based on the original good ideas, but not really adding anything in these new iterations. And honestly, Nintendo is kind of like this too. Granted, back in the 3DS Wii U days, they were a lot nicer to their customers just because the Wii U sucked, honestly, and it did not sell very well, so they kind of had to be. But especially in the Switch era, they've been terrible to their consumers. Whether it's from the Joy-Con drift incident or just the fact that they refuse to let people play their old games, only reselling it in this Nintendo Online kind of almost streaming service kind of deal, subscription model. Same thing with their music now as well. Nintendo's always been known for generally making good games but being terrible to the consumers, and it's for these kinds of reasons. And you can even look in some of their more creatively bankrupt decisions, like the New Super Mario Bros. Series, where a lot of it is kind of this same idea of let's keep things tame and simple and only maybe lightly reference old things, but not bring too many radically new ideas to the franchise. But Robobot kind of acts as both a simple commentary on late-stage capitalism, but also a metatextual commentary on that use of Nostalgia Bait kind of as a whole in the industry. Of course, the only problem with this analogy is that Planet Robobot is actually really good. While that mechanization idea could come off as gimmicky and repetitive if done improperly, Robobot uses the theme for some really genuinely interesting and creative ideas. For instance, all of the locations use it in very interesting ways. Patch Plains has all the trees made out of metal. Resolution Road and Rhythm Root are both in a city, one of them at day and one of them at night, with Rhythm Root being really music themed, which I think is really cool. Overload Ocean has these giant faucets and this like deep underwater area with cities built on wine glasses and bottles, which is like so cool. And then Gigabyte Grounds has these like oil drill blenders with power lines that are like spaghetti wrapped around the poles, which are like forks. Like, it's just like, who thinks of these things? It's kind of like one of those I Spy books where you have a bunch of like junk cluttered around, but it's like, you know, taking it together to be like thematically cohesive and cool. There's a lot of unique locations like the train levels or the factories that are like on theme, and then once you actually get into the access arc, there are offices and laboratories that make sense with both like the Haltman theming and just the idea of like a big mega corporation. And in each world there's one laboratory that, for one, has a very good remix of an old Kirby song, but you know, is this like giant screw that's in the ground that you have to go up and then go through this laboratory where they're, you know, working on stuff that's like relevant to the area. Mechanized enemies feel unique enough from their original counterparts, and I think use the theming really well. Like the Waddle Dees and their little like mechs that shoot missiles at you, or the different robo versions of old mini bosses, which I think is really neat. And even the regular bosses feel really different to fight compared to their originals, with, you know, most of them going with that like mechanization idea of like Clanky Woods getting limbs and a rocket launcher, and Meta Knight getting that tail and stuff. But they also go beyond that, like with those clone DDDs, where it's kind of beyond just like put some metal on a established thing. It's like, here's a technological thing that is different but still cool and fits with the theming. Like, the reason that it works is that they aren't saying, here's that one thing that you liked, but again, it's saying, what if we took this old thing and reimagined it to where it's reminiscent of the old thing, to where you can still get it, but it feels distinct and creative. And the music, oh my god, dude. I cannot, like, words cannot express how much I love the music in this game. Originally this video I was actually going to write just about the music, though I thought this kind of full game topic was a lot more interesting. I just like genuinely love it that much. The combination of electronic remixes of old songs, like straight up ported old songs, and the genuinely like amazing and beautiful new compositions that they made for the game is just fantastic. And like, listening back to it, it's one of the most impressive 3DS soundtracks I've ever heard. It doesn't sound very kind of compressed and like stock instrumentation kind of thing that you tend to get from a lot of that. It feels like unique, and like they, you know, definitely knew what they were doing. And I've heard somebody say like Kirby music makes it very clear that the people writing really love Kirby, and I think that really shows, especially in this game. I mean, like, I could legitimately talk about this soundtrack for hours. Please let me know if you do want to see that, because I will. But on top of all of this, I think the funny thing about me in particular writing this video is that Planet Robobot was actually my first Kirby game. I got it as a birthday present back in 2016 when it came out, and I had no idea who any of these characters were. I had no concept for why a giant king penguin and a bat with a mask and a, you know, little pink guy were all here. I was just kind of playing through the game and being like, oh, this is neat. And like, still with all of this, it's probably my favorite to this day. Now, of course, that is like nostalgia rose-tinted to a degree because it's my personal first game, but I think what it shows above all is that this game is still really good, even without the nostalgia bait added to it. Planet Robobot just stands on its own without the context of previous entries, with references to past games only enhancing the experience for longtime fans, which is, in my opinion, the perfect way to handle so-called nostalgia bait. Nostalgia bait is very powerful, but as a result, it needs to be handled with responsibility. Lots of franchises will just throw it out there to make a quick buck, and they'll end up losing a lot of their immersion and credibility in the process, which is kind of where this like outrage comes from. But as Kirby has shown, intentional and subtle usage of nostalgia bait over an already good piece of content can enhance the story with some genuinely really powerful emotional force. You just kind of have to have a good base product with it. I really love Kirby. Like, I don't think I realized that until starting to film this video, but I think, like, it's kind of embarrassing to say, but I don't really cry or like get emotional over most pieces of like media at all, but I think something about Kirby like really does that for me. I think just that sense of happiness and friendship and like everything's gonna be okay is something that just really hits for me. And I think like it shows how powerful this nostalgia bait stuff can be, just when used correctly. It's not necessarily that bad, you just really need to know how to use it. I'm probably going to be making more of these videos. This is kind of mine to be like, you know, they always say if you want to start doing something, just the first step is doing it. So I'm just filming this to get started. But I really like video games, mostly Nintendo, like indie space, especially video game music. I don't know if I'll make any dedicated videos to that, but if you're interested in that and you want to see more content like this, you know, like, subscribe, hit the bell, and let me know what you want me to talk about, because, yeah, I don't know. I want to keep doing this. See you guys.